The journal's secrets. It wasn't a younger version of me, nor was it an older one. It was simply me, sitting at the corner of Stella's diner, a cracked mug of coffee in front of me. The steam rose from the coffee, twisting and curling like my thoughts. I stared into the dark liquid, lost in the endless swirl of what was to come. My fingers were wrapped around the edges of a photograph, its paper worn thin from countless times of being held, studied, and passed over. It was like it had lived through years of stories it wasn't meant to tell. I slowly turned the photograph over, my heart pounding, the world feeling surreal in that moment. My hands trembled slightly as I read the 3 words written on the back. Don't trust her. They were in the same sharp handwriting I had seen in the journal I'd found earlier, spine-chillingly familiar. The cold, hard ink of a warning that felt both distant and immediate. There was a sensation that crawled under my skin, like the eyes of some unseen watcher. The words haunted me, sending a cold shiver down my spine. They carried with them an undercurrent of dread, the kind that weighed heavier with every passing second. The ink was faded, but the message was clear. The woman who had given me the journal, the one who had drawn me into this world of half-truths and conspiracies, she couldn't be trusted. I should have heeded the warning. I should have left Hollowedge right then and there, burned the journal, and disappeared without a trace. But that's not what I did. Instead, I found myself seated in this diner, staring at a photograph, a journal, and the unraveling of a nightmare I had no way of stopping. And here I am now, telling you this story, trapped in the spiral of choices I made, choices I can never undo. Unraveling the pages. The journal was a mess. At first glance, it seemed like the scattered thoughts of someone whose mind had cracked under pressure. The sentences were fragmented, thoughts dashed off like the scribblings of a deranged mind. Some of the pages were filled with abstract sketches and diagrams, blueprints for something unidentifiable. But as I spent hours flipping through it, something started to emerge from the chaos. A pattern. A logic hidden beneath the madness. Joseph Harlan's name appeared constantly, scattered throughout the journal in various entries. It wasn't just a name. His presence was central to the fragmented narrative. There were references to a place called Blackthorn Facility, dates, coordinates, and timelines that didn't make sense at first. But the more I pieced them together, the clearer the path became. The journal wasn't just an incoherent mess. It was a roadmap. A roadmap to something far darker than I had ever imagined. One symbol appeared over and over, a jagged circle with a triangle inside. The lines were uneven, rushed. Whoever had drawn it seemed to have done so under duress, as though they were in a hurry to get the information down before they ran out of time. The more I looked at it, the more I felt that strange sensation, like the symbol was watching me back. I didn't know why, but I knew it wasn't just some random scrawl. The chill I felt when I first saw it only grew stronger. The symbol meant something, and I needed to understand what that something was before it was too late. The first lead. As dawn approached, the gray light filtering through the grimy curtains of my motel room, I was still reading, still searching. I had more questions than answers, and the more I read, the deeper I sank into confusion and fear. I couldn't ignore the fact that I needed to figure out who Joseph Harlan was, and why his name kept appearing in the journal. But one thing was certain, I couldn't trust anyone in Hollowedge, not after what I had seen, not after the warning in the photograph, not after everything that had happened since I found the journal. I decided I needed to start somewhere, so I returned to the diner. It was a long shot, but I hoped that someone there might know the woman in the red scarf or have seen her before. The journal felt like a heavy weight in my bag, its secrets pressing down on me. Every decision I made felt like I was falling deeper into a web I couldn't escape. When I stepped into Stella's diner, it was eerily quiet. The soft hum of the neon lights overhead was the only sound, other than the rhythmic clinking of the waitress's rag against the counter. She was the same woman from the night before, unaffected, mechanical in her movements. She glanced up briefly as I walked in, but her expression remained unreadable. I took a seat at the counter. "Back again?" she asked, her voice flat, a faint hint of annoyance in it, as if she was asking a question she already knew the answer to. "Yeah," I replied, sliding onto a stool. "Hoping you can help me with something." She raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms over her chest in a protective stance. "What kind of something?" I pulled the journal from my bag and flipped it open to the page that had mentioned Blackthorn facility. "Ever heard of this place?" I asked. Her face changed in an instant. The casual indifference disappeared, replaced by something darker, something guarded. She leaned in, lowering her voice just enough so that only I could hear. Her words were sharp, tinged with suspicion. "Where did you hear that name?" "A friend," I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. I was doing my best to hide the panic rising in my chest. "Why? What is it?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Instead, she glanced around the diner, checking to make sure we were alone, that no one was listening. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "You don't want to dig into Blackthorn," she said. "Trust me." The man in the suit. Before I could respond or ask her more questions, the bell above the door jingled. A man walked in, tall, broad-shouldered. His face was hard, carved from stone, like a statue that had been left to weather in the open. He was dressed in a dark suit, his movements deliberate, purposeful. And he wasn't here for food. He was here for something else. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as he approached the counter. He didn't order anything. He didn't sit down. He simply stood there, staring at me like he was waiting for something. My heart pounded. I couldn't look away from him. The waitress stiffened when she saw him, her eyes darting nervously between me and the man. She muttered something about getting back to work and disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone with him. He didn't speak immediately. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on me, as if assessing my every move. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. Finally he spoke. His voice was calm, but the menace lurking in his words was unmistakable. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," he said. "I suggest you return it." In that moment, I felt the walls closing in. The weight of the journal in my bag felt suffocating. Without thinking, my body reacted. I bolted. I could hear the man shout behind me, the sound of his heavy footsteps following me into the street. My mind was racing. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. The chase begins. The fog outside was thick and suffocating, swallowing the world in its embrace. I ran through the streets, my breath coming in short bursts, my chest tight with fear. I ducked into alleyways, taking turns I hoped would throw him off. The street was eerily quiet, almost unnaturally so. My heart was thumping in my ears, drowning out the world around me. I didn't stop to think, I just ran. My lungs burned. My legs ached. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close to unraveling something that could change everything. Eventually, I found myself standing in front of an old library at the edge of town. It was dark, abandoned, the windows boarded up, and covered in layers of grime. But it felt like the kind of place where I could find some semblance of safety, even if only for a moment. The building creaked as I stepped inside, the smell of must and old paper filling my lungs. It was quiet, so quiet that I could hear the thudding of my own heartbeat. A new clue. I opened the journal again, my hand shaking. The weight of it felt heavier with every passing second. And then, as if the journal had a will of its own, a new page appeared. A phrase written in bold, underlined letters. "The watchtower holds the key." Beneath it, a crude sketch of a building I recognized immediately. Blackthorn Observatory. That was it. That was where I had to go next. It was the only lead I had left.